Hi, I'm Jerry Sparks, president of AG Financial Insurance, and we're here at General Counsel here in Anaheim, California. And we're sitting actually in our booth, and I'm sitting with Rich Hammer, the man and the legend, the legal counsel for the General Counsel of the Assemblies of God, diesel mechanic, CPA, and astrophotographer. We're going to actually take a look at a couple of the pictures that Rich actually shot as a photographer, and let's go ahead and do that.
Yeah, we'll take a look at a few of my recent pictures. This is the Pleiades star cluster in the constellation Taurus. This is a 14-hour image of an object about 500 light years away. This was featured in Astronomy magazine in a recent issue.
Go ahead, let's do the next one.
And the next picture is the southern pinwheel galaxy in the constellation Hydra. And this is about 15 million light years away. It's a southern hemisphere object, so I had to take this picture robotically controlling a telescope with a deep space tracking station in New South Wales, Australia. And then the next picture is the northern pinwheel galaxy, M101, in the constellation Ursa Major, just below the handle or above the handle of the Big Dipper. This is about 21 million light years away. And finally, we have the Orion Nebula, 1,500 light years away. It's a giant gas cloud in the constellation Orion. And those are just some examples of my pictures, which you can see on my website, See the Glory, that's SEECtheglory.com, in reference to Psalms 19:1, the heavens declare the glory of God. And through my imaging, I try to help you see the glory online.
So as you know, with anything we do with Risk Management Live, Rich actually does things the way that he should do it, and he does things thoroughly, as you can tell by some of the pictures that he does. And today at Risk Management Live, we're going to be talking about how to handle a sexual offender in your church. And Rich, go ahead and let's just start with, you know, a sexual offender is attending your church. What are some of the things that you need to do to protect your church once you have the knowledge of that?
Well, Jerry, that's such an important question, because there are over 600,000 registered sex offenders in this country, and many of them want to go to church. Many of them do go to church. Most of them are in churches and are not known by church leadership to be there. So there are various ways that church leaders become aware that they have a registered sex offender. Maybe somebody knows the person's background and story, tells the pastor. Maybe it's during a counseling session involving the pastor or some other staff member. There are many, many ways. It could be a relative, it could be a victim, informs the pastor. However it happens, once you receive that information that there is a registered sex offender in your church, that imposes upon the church certain legal duties, in my opinion, to safeguard especially children in your congregation from this individual.
So let's talk about some of those duties that the church would need to do. So can you go through those just very quickly? What some of the duties that they would need to follow?
I think I would break it down into two categories. Number one would be if the person applies to work in the church with children, let's say, or if the person just wants to attend. If the person is going to be set aside as a volunteer or paid church worker, you have a duty to exercise due diligence in examining this person's background and fitness for that job. And the failure to do that, Jerry, as we know, can result in liability based on what is called negligent selection. So you want to be sure you exercise reasonable care in the selection of workers. And this means doing reference checks, doing background checks, doing criminal records checks, checking sex offender registries to see if this person is a registered sex offender. Because I would say one of, if not the worst position your church can be in, is if you hire as a volunteer or paid employee somebody that's on a sex offender registry in your state. And all you have to do is go to the nsopw.gov website, and you can do a criminal background, you can do a background check instantly. You don't need consent, you don't need a social security number. It's free, it's instantaneous, and you can determine if this person that wants to teach a kindergarten Sunday school class is on a sex offender registry. Just imagine if that person is not checked. You don't check the sex offender registry, and you have a guy on a sex offender registry teaching a kindergarten class in your church. who molests a child, that is almost an indefensible case for your church. You're going to be pilloried in the media. How can this happen? Juries are outraged that this kind of thing can happen. So again, you need to do your homework, you need to do your due diligence, examining the fitness and suitability of this person to be, that you will entrust children to that person's care.
Rich, I know that there was a study done here just recently about how churches should react to a registered sex offender in church, and why don't you give the three things that can happen, that may happen,
right.
And let's discuss those a little bit and how you would use those in each situation.
Well, this was a major Christian publication that did the largest survey ever done of church practices with regard to handling sex offenders. And it was interesting to me, Jerry, that only 3% said that they follow a practice of total exclusion. About 80%, 79% as I recall, said they would allow the sex offender to continue attending the church subject to several restrictions. The most important ones are the obvious ones, that this person could not work with minors, could not transport minors other than their own biological children, and most importantly would be in the observational presence of what we might call a chaperone at all times. Not necessarily someone that you handcuff to the person, but someone that just is able to have that person in his or her line of sight, so you can just observe that person at all times and make sure from the time he checks in to the time he checks out of the church, you have a chain of custody and observation where it is literally impossible for this person to get a child alone in an empty classroom. So, and then the third option, so you've got the three options, the three responses of total exclusion of this registered sex offender. You've got the option of a chaperone policy and other conditions, what I call a conditional attendance policy, where the person can attend subject to various conditions. And number three, and by far the most common, is doing nothing.
That is, as far as we're concerned from a risk management issue, that is not an option.
That's not an option.
So let's talk about total exclusion. When should a church have a total exclusion of allowing this person to attend the church?
Well, Jerry, you know that in 2006, Congress passed federal legislation setting up a sex offender registry system in this country on a national basis. And they divided sex offenses into three tiers: Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. Tier 1 are the most minor, may I say. They put you on a sex offender registry for 15 years. Tier 2 would be more serious offenses. That puts you on the sex offender registry for 25 years. Tier 3 are the most serious offenses, and you're on the registry for life. Whichever registry you're on, you have duties of verification, of checking in with the authorities to update information. You have to maintain the name and address of your employer, your license plate number. There's a number of things you must do. So the point is, if you're at Tier 3, those are the most serious crimes. That's lifetime on the registry. Some churches believe those crimes were so heinous that maybe we should practice total exclusion from and I have no problem with that. If you cannot ensure the chain of custody, the complete and total observation of that individual at all times without exception for however many years the person wants to attend, you cannot use the second option. You've got to go to total exclusion. So, and let me just mention, Jerry, one other way that I think you need to follow the total exclusion policy, and that is the fact that many of these cases, a sex offender's victims were in church, and to expose those victims to re-victimization by being exposed to the perpetrator by going to church, that's unthinkable. And a lot of churches say, we draw the line there. You cannot come back to this church.
Now, actually, I can think of one more situation where that is a possibility, and that is a lot of the time that people are sexual offenders, they're put on they have a probationary officer, and they actually may have where they are not allowed to attend church or attend children's functions, and so they may exclude them where you have to do a total exclusion and may not welcome them. Otherwise, you can use a conditional attendance policy.
Jerry, there's 600,000 registered sex offenders that are loose in society, out of prison. The vast majority were released early, but subject to a probationary agreement that if they violate the terms and conditions, they go right back to prison and finish their term. I have seen many cases where one of the conditions for probation, for getting out of prison before your sentence is served, is that you must not attend churches because of the concentration of children. And so don't you think you need to know that? So as part of your due diligence in determining the suitability of a worker, if you need to determine if this person, whether it's a worker, volunteer, or just an attendee of your church, you've got to know if that person is subject to a probationary agreement that bans the attendance at your church. You've got, again, can you imagine what a jury's going to do if in a trial for child molestation, the pastor is asked, did you ever check this person's probationary agreement? Did you ever check it and discover that he's not allowed to attend church? No. I mean, you can imagine what's going to happen.
It would be disastrous. So a conditional policy should be actually done. It should be looked at from an attorney, have an attorney draft it. And that is actually what most churches do, as you said. Close to 80% of our churches use a conditional attendance policy. We did put together a sample one that is actually on agfinancial.org's website, and you can actually see that. Question, what if you know that a person has committed a sexual offense and wants to volunteer, but they're not on a sexual registry? Do you still allow them to do things, or what is your suggestion?
Well, and that does happen. You know, maybe it's a relative, maybe it's an acquaintance, maybe somebody knows that another individual has engaged in a sexually inappropriate relationship with an adult or minor, and what do you do with that information? And what is your recommendation?
My recommendation is that we follow the conditional attendance policy.
That's right. I recommend the same thing, that we follow. We treat the person as if he were registered. So I think that's the answer to that question.
Once you have the knowledge of somebody committing a sexual offense, I think you have to continue to actually protect all those children that are in the church, and so I would stick with the conditional.
It doesn't really matter
policy.
that that person is not a registered sex offender. Maybe that's because the authorities didn't know about these prior offenses. Whatever the reason, the question is, do you have knowledge of inappropriate behavior in the past that renders this person a risk to others? That's the key.
So actually, if you have a registered sex offender that wants to attend your church, here's what to do. You do a total exclusion in certain areas. The probation will not allow it. If the crimes were so heinous, basically, that they shouldn't be attending church, or number three, if the victim is attending the church, you do not want that person attending the church. Otherwise, use a conditional attendance policy, and that should help protect your church with a registered sex offender in your church.
Jerry, let me mention one other thing.
Go ahead.
And that is this. I see this happen with some regularity. And that is, the church staff is bored on a Friday afternoon, and they've been using the nsopw.gov, the National Sex Offender Public Registry website, to do background checks to determine if volunteers and workers in the church are registered sex offenders. Well, they're familiar with that website. And so here's the staff sitting around on a Friday afternoon. Hey, why don't we go down the membership roll and see if we have any registered sex offenders? Let me tell you something. It's not uncommon for a church to find some. You found 17 in your church?
I found, yes.
17 in his church. Whoa. You present that to the pastor. Pastor, we have 17 sex offenders in our church that nobody knew about. So let me just emphasize, you do not have a legal duty to do criminal records checks or sex offender registry checks on everybody in the church. It's only those persons that you set aside as a volunteer or employee in some official position. But so what do you do now that you've come up with these 17 names, or 7 or 2, whatever it might be, depending on the church size? Now you do have to treat this person with great care and follow the measures that we've just been summarizing to make sure that this person is not a risk to others.
So actually what ends up happening a lot of times, somebody has a feeling that a person may be a registered sex offender. Then once you find out that they are a registered sex offender, then you have a duty to protect the public from that. But until you know that, your duty does
There's
not.
no duty.
There is no duty.
Right.
So again, we're live here at the General Council here in Anaheim, California, and there's a group of people around us and people walking around all around. But Rich, really appreciate your time. agfinancial.org has got a lot of risk management ideas and protections on the website. You need to go to that website and look under the risk management for any additional resources that you may have, any questions that you may have. We're here to try to protect you and your church. And Rich, once again, I appreciate your time. Thank you for sharing some of your photographs and being the astrophotographer that you are, the diesel mechanic that you are, the CPA that you are, but mainly thank you for being legal counsel to the General Council of the Assemblies of God. Appreciate it so much.
You bet.